Lena opened the front door, expecting another quiet, ordinary evening. But the moment she saw Evan standing there with Michael's forgotten folder in his hand, the air around them shifted in a way she didn't want to name. Evan had always carried a calm presence, steady and polite. But tonight, something in his eyes flickered with a deeper emotion he tried to hide. Lena had noticed that look before. In small moments when Michael wasn't paying attention, an extra second of eye contact. Soft pause when she laughed, a kind of awareness that made her feel more visible than she had in years. She never encouraged. It never let herself think too much about it, because she loved her husband and she believed in loyalty. But loneliness had a strange way of sharpening the senses. Michael was working late again, the third time that week, and the house had been quiet for hours. She had been folding laundry, staring at the rain clouds rolling in, when the doorbell rang and brought Evan into the warm light of their home. He stepped inside when she invited him, brushing a few leaves from his jacket, and Lena could feel a gentle tension settle between them. Not uncomfortable, but undeniably present. He handed her the folder, but he didn't leave right away. Instead, he lingered as though he had something more to say and wasn't sure how to begin. She told him he looked tired, and he gave a small smile, the kind that carried more truth than he intended to show. They moved to the porch, where the sky was darkening, and the hush of the evening wrapped around them like a curtain, closing them off from the rest of the world. Evan leaned against the railing, silently watching the neighborhood lights turn on one by one, and Lena felt a pull inside her, not romantic in a reckless way, but emotional in the way two people sometimes recognize each other's quiet pain. She didn't fully understand why she could sense his thoughts without him speaking, but she knew something weighed on him. The breeze brushed her hair, she tucked it behind her ear. And when she looked at Evan again, he was already watching her, quickly glancing away when he realized he'd been caught. She felt her heartbeat jump in a way that surprised her. She wasn't used to being the center of someone's full attention. Michael cared for her, of course he did, but he had been distant lately, distracted by work, tired when he came home, always promising they would reconnect once things slowed down. Lena had been waiting months for things to slow down. Evan cleared his throat as if pushing himself to speak. He told her Michael had mentioned staying late again, and Lena nodded, trying to hide the tiny ache in her chest. She joked lightly about being used to it by now, but the joke didn't land. Evan looked at her with an expression she didn't know how to interpret, some mixture of concern, frustration, and something softer that she wasn't ready to name. She felt exposed without meaning to be. The sky dimmed further, the wind carried. The scent of damp earth and the first hint of thunder rolled far in the distance. Lena felt the moment tightening, as if the world around them expected something to be said. Evan finally spoke, voice low and steady, asking her how she had been holding up lately. He didn't ask casually. He asked like someone who had been paying attention for a long time. Lena told him she had been fine, but even she could hear the hollowness in her answer. Evan didn't press her, but he looked at her in a way that felt too honest. She felt a wave of awareness, sudden and sharp. Here was a man who seemed to notice the small things she thought were invisible. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees as they stood there, two people connected by silence and unspoken truths. When Evan finally said her name, it sounded different, gentler, deliberate hand her breath caught. He asked if they could talk, really talk, and Lena felt a nervous warmth spread through her chest. She didn't know what he wanted to talk about, but part of her already sensed it wasn't something small. A soft tension tightened the air. Thunder echoed again, closer this time, and Lena felt a subtle shiver of worry and curiosity. She stepped back slightly toward the doorway, suddenly unsure whether she should let this conversation begin at all, but also unable to walk away from it. Evan took a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for months. He said he knew he shouldn't say certain things, but he couldn't keep pretending nothing was wrong. His voice held a sincerity she had never heard from him before, and it startled her how deeply it reached her. Lena felt her pulse grow unsteady, her thoughts tangled with hope and caution. She wondered whether he was about to confess something painful or something she wasn't prepared to hear. The sky darkened completely, the porch light glowing warmer, brighter, making the moment feel even more intimate than it should have. Evan's eyes met hers, steady and heavy with the truth he'd been carrying. Lena stood there, caught between her loyalty to her marriage and the emotional honesty she'd been missing for years. She had no idea what he was about to reveal, but a quiet part of her, one she normally ignored, felt drawn to it. Drawn to being fully seen for the first time in far too long. The evening held its breath, and Lena felt her own breath falter. Because she knew that whatever Evan said next would change something inside her, maybe something she couldn't undo. She gripped the edge of her sweater slightly, grounding herself against the storm gathering both outside and within. And just as she opened her mouth to speak, Evan stepped closer, not too close, but close enough to make her heart tighten, ready to tell her the truth he had hidden behind every quiet glance, every respectful pause, every moment he had chosen silence over honesty. Whatever he was about to say was coming, and Lena knew she wasn't ready for it. Yet she couldn't imagine turning away. Lena followed Evan to the porch, her heart still pounding from the unspoken tension that had filled the doorway moments ago, and as they sat on the wooden bench, the air between them felt electric, charged with everything neither of them had dared to say before. The wind carried the scent of rain and pine, rustling the leaves around them and giving the quiet night an almost intimate atmosphere. Like the world had paused to watch them finally confront the truth. Evan's hands rested loosely on his knees, and Lena noticed how tightly he had been gripping them before. A small sign of how nervous he was, how much he had wanted to say what he was about to say. "I know I shouldn't say this," he began, his voice low and careful, almost trembling. "But I feel like you're fading." The word hit her harder than she expected, a strange mix of sorrow and recognition twisting in her chest. "Fading?" she asked softly, trying to keep her voice steady, though her stomach twisted in uneasy anticipation. He nodded, slowly looking out over the dim neighborhood street, the glow of the distant streetlights catching in his eyes, and continued, "You're here, Lena, but you're not really here. You smile, you laugh, you keep the house running, but I can see the quiet sadness underneath, and anyone who knows you can see it too." Lena swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in her throat as the truth of his words sank in. She had felt invisible in her own home, unnoticed by the man she loved. And now someone else was pointing it out with gentle precision. She tried to laugh, lightly, to deflect the sting of reality, but Evan's eyes held hers and the humor died in her throat. "Michael's my friend," he said, almost immediately, as if anticipating the objection. "And I would never want to hurt him, but I can't pretend that I don't see it. That I don't notice what's been missing in your life." His words, soft and earnest, cut deeper than she expected, leaving a warmth and ache tangled together in her chest. Lena felt her eyes prick with unshed tears, a mix of guilt and longing swirling inside her as she tried to make sense of the emotions she had long ignored. She wanted to deny it, wanted to push away the uncomfortable feelings that Evan's honesty had stirred. But every fiber of her being told her this wasn't about betrayal. It was about recognition, someone truly seeing her for the first time in years. The sky above rumbled softly with the first hints of distant thunder, and the rhythmic sound of rain beginning to fall on the porch roof made the moment feel more urgent, more intimate, though neither moved closer physically. "I've watched," Evan continued, voice quieter now. "I've wanted to tell you so many times, but I couldn't. I didn't want to create problems. I didn't want to cross a line. But I can't pretend anymore that I don't see the woman I've known all these years struggling silently, waiting for someone to notice her." Lena's hands were pressed into her lap, gripping the edge of her sweater as if anchoring herself to the present, to the reality that she couldn't ignore what he was saying. Every word he spoke seemed to draw a line straight to her heart, laying bare the loneliness she had tried so hard to disguise. Evan hesitated, swallowed, and then added, I know Michael loves you, but I think sometimes he forgets to see you. To really notice the light you carry, the way your smile hides pain, the way you give everything and sometimes receive nothing in return. Lena's chest tightened, and she realized that no one had ever articulated her feelings like this before. It wasn't romantic in a reckless way yet, but it was intensely personal, painfully honest, and completely disarming. She wanted to speak, to reassure him, but the words wouldn't come. They felt small compared to the truth that had finally been spoken aloud. Evan's gaze softened, becoming almost tender, and he said, I'm not here to complicate your life. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here because I care about you, because I've always cared. And because I can't stand to watch you fade into yourself when the world deserves to see all of you. Lena's throat felt tight, and she had to blink several times to stop, the tears from spilling. His words were simple but heavy, like a gentle hammer against the walls she had built around her heart. She realized then that this conversation wasn't about desire or betrayal. It was about truth, recognition, and emotional honesty. She leaned back slightly, letting the silence stretch between them. And for the first time in a long while, she felt someone's full attention on her, not distracted, not preoccupied, not rushed, but entirely focused on her reality. Evan looked at her again, quietly, almost pleadingly, and whispered, I just wish you could see what I see. The strength, the beauty, the person you are underneath all the quiet pain. Lena's chest heaved as the rain picked up, droplets tapping the wooden porch and mingling with the weight of their conversation. She felt raw, vulnerable, and exposed in a way that scared her, yet it also felt liberating, like someone had finally removed a heavy cloak she didn't know she was wearing. I don't know what to say, she admitted softly, voice trembling, because I've been hiding, even from myself, how much I've been struggling. Evan nodded, not interrupting, simply listening, giving her the space to speak her heart. She continued, words spilling out faster now, a release she hadn't anticipated. Telling him about the quiet nights she spent waiting for Michael, the evenings when she felt invisible, the smiles she wore to keep peace in appearances, and the loneliness that wrapped around her even when the house was full. Evan never moved, never offered advice or solutions. He just listened, letting her reveal her truth without judgment. When she finally stopped, he exhaled slowly, a soft sigh that seemed to carry relief and sorrow together, and said, That's exactly what I needed to hear, even though I wish it weren't this hard for you. I needed to know, to really understand, because you deserve to be seen and heard, not just managed, not just tolerated, but truly known. Lena felt her chest tighten and loosen at the same time, her heart racing with emotion she had tried to suppress for so long. The rain was steady now, drumming a quiet rhythm that seemed to echo the pulse of her own awakening. And for the first time, she felt a fragile, tentative relief of having someone truly notice her. Evan leaned back slightly, allowing a respectful distance, but the connection lingered, heavy and meaningful. And Lena realized that this was not about temptation, but about the profound intimacy of being fully seen. She had always thought intimacy was physical. But tonight she learned it could exist in honesty, in attention, in acknowledgement. In a shared moment that revealed the depth of human emotion without crossing boundaries. Thunder rolled softly. Again, distant but insistent, Evan's words echoed in her mind. You are not fading. You are alive, and you deserve to be seen. Lena felt a gentle clarity begin to take root inside her. A sense that the invisible walls she had built were starting to crumble. Not because someone was trying to break them, but because she finally allowed herself to recognize the truth she had been hiding. And even though Michael was still out there, unaware of the layers of her inner life, she understood that she had been given a rare gift to witness, a friend, someone who saw her completely without judgment or demand. She knew that whatever happened next, she would carry this moment with her, the honesty of it, the emotional intensity. and the profound recognition that she had been craving all along. The rain continued to fall. The porch glowed softly, and in the quiet tension between them, Lena realized that life was far more complex than she had admitted, filled with emotional currents she had neglected, and that maybe, just maybe, allowing someone to see her fully could be the first step toward understanding herself again. She glanced at Evan, who met her gaze with a calm intensity that felt like both an anchor and a challenge. And she knew, without words, that this night would change something deep inside her, something that she could no longer ignore, even if she tried. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, and the conversation, unplanned but inevitable, had opened a door that she could not close. As they sat in silence, listening to the rain, Lena realized the evening had shifted everything. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable, to show cracks in her carefully maintained life, and she felt both terrified and exhilarated, caught between the fear of what she might discover and the relief of being seen at last. This was no longer just an ordinary night. It had become a turning point, a fragile emotional awakening that neither of them could forget. And in that stillness, as thunder rumbled and rain fell steadily, Lena understood that some truths had the power to change a life in the quietest, most profound way, leaving her heart racing, her mind alert, and her soul quietly hopeful for what came next. The rain had grown heavier, drumming against the roof and windows with a steady rhythm that seemed to echo the tension in Lena's chest. And she stepped inside the house, expecting Evan to leave. Yet when she glanced back, she saw he had not moved, standing quietly near the doorway, hesitant, as if caught between leaving and saying something he could no longer hold inside. The room smelled of warm tea and polished wood, a comforting normalcy that contrasted sharply with the intensity of the conversation they had just shared on the porch. And Lena felt a strange pull in her chest, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and longing she could not name. Evan's eyes met hers again, calm but loaded with emotion, and he finally took a step toward the living room. Not intruding, but closing the small distance with purpose, and Lena felt her pulse quicken in response, surprised at the flutter of anticipation that she had tried to suppress. "Lena," he began softly, his voice carrying a weight that made her lean in without thinking. "I need to be honest with you. Came here tonight because I couldn't stay silent any longer. I can't leave without telling you what I've been feeling, even if it's complicated or uncomfortable." She nodded, her throat tight, her mind racing as memories of months and years of unnoticed moments flashed through her. And she realized that the quiet longing she had sensed in him was real, persistent and patient. But tonight it had found a voice. He looked down briefly, gathering his thoughts, then continued. "It's not about taking anything from your life or your marriage. It's not about breaking trust or creating problems. It's about acknowledging the truth. I can't stop seeing. I notice you, Lena. I notice the way you carry yourself, the way you hide your fatigue behind smiles, the way your heart longs for connection even when it's quiet. And I've wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how." Lena's hands were pressed tightly in her lap as she absorbed his words, the mixture of honesty and restraint making her feel both exposed and protected at the same time. She realized she had been starving for recognition, for someone to see her fully, without judgment, and Evan's quiet persistence, his careful attention, giving her that space in a way no one had in years. She felt tears threaten to spill, but she blinked them back, allowing herself to breathe, to feel, to acknowledge the emotions she had been suppressing. Evan's voice softened and he said, "I don't want anything inappropriate. Lena, I want to see you, the real you, unguarded. Unafraid to be honest about what you feel and who you are beneath the routines and the responsibilities that wear you down." The words were like a warm weight pressing against her chest, a mixture of longing and reassurance that made her heart ache with recognition. She realized that what he wanted to watch was not a fleeting moment or an act of intimacy, but her truth, her vulnerability, her humanity that had been ignored or taken for granted in her marriage. For the first time, she felt safe showing that side of herself, the side that was tired, hopeful, lonely, and longing, without fear of judgment or consequence. "I don't know if I've ever let anyone see me like this," she whispered, almost to herself, and Evan shook his head slightly, encouraging her without words to continue. She spoke then, hesitantly at first, about the nights she spent waiting for Michael to come home, the quiet dinners where conversation had been replaced by screens and fatigue, the moments of doubt she had tried to hide even from herself. Her voice grew steadier as the words poured out, as if each sentence lifted a layer of weight from her shoulders, and Evan listened without interruption, his presence steady, his eyes attentive, creating a space where she could finally be honest. He nodded softly, acknowledging her feelings, reflecting her emotions without trying to fix them. And Lena realized that this simple act of listening, of being truly seen, was a kind of intimacy she had been missing all along. The rain outside intensified, pattering against the windows, a steady rhythm that seemed to sync with the beating of her heart. And she felt an unfamiliar lightness, as if the act of speaking her truth had given her a fragile freedom. Evan spoke again, voice gentle, carrying the weight of his sincerity. "That's exactly what I wanted to watch, Lena. Not because I wanted to change anything, not because I wanted to disrupt your life, but because I needed to see the real you, to understand the layers beneath the surface that most people overlook. And I can't unsee it now, and I wouldn't want to." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw in his eyes no hidden agendas, no reckless desire, only the steady, patient care of someone who had waited long enough to understand the depth of her experience. The realization brought a lump to her throat. She had never felt so seen, so understood, so acknowledged in a way that resonated with the deepest part of her soul. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted softly, her voice shaky, "'cause I've been hiding for so long. I don't even know what I want sometimes. Only that I've felt invisible, even to the person I love most." Evan reached for the small distance between them, but not to cross a line, only to gesture his presence. A silent affirmation that she could speak freely. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said quietly. "You only need to know that someone sees you, that someone understands the weight you carry, that someone honors the person you are inside. That's what matters. That's what I've wanted you to know." Lena felt the words settle in her chest, heavy and warm, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. She realized that the conversation, unplanned but inevitable, had given her a gift, a mirror reflecting her truth, a witness to the parts of herself she had long ignored. The room seemed smaller, cozier, as if the world had shrunk to just the two of them, connected by honesty and respect. And she felt the storm outside and the storm inside her intertwining, cleansing, clarifying, making her see herself with new eyes. Evan's gaze softened, his voice gentle as he added, "I came here not to complicate things, but to remind you that being fully seen is not a betrayal. It's a recognition of your worth, your strength, your heart. You deserve to be seen, Lena, really seen, and I've waited long enough to make sure you understood that." Tears pricked at her eyes, but this time they were not only sorrow, they were relief, recognition, and a tender awakening of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for years. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension ebb slightly, feeling her shoulders relax as if the act of revealing herself had lifted an invisible burden. Evan stood then, not moving toward the door yet, but giving her one last steady look, one that carried care, respect, and a subtle longing that was restrained but palpable. And Lena felt a curious mix of warmth and fear swirl inside her. She realized this was not about crossing boundaries or creating temptation. It was about the profound intimacy of emotional honesty, the kind that strengthens the soul rather than complicates it. "Thank you," she whispered finally, voice soft but steady, "for seeing me, for listening, for reminding me that I matter in ways I've forgotten." Evan nodded, a gentle smile crossing his face, and he replied, "That's all I wanted. To remind you and to honor you, and to be here in a way that doesn't hurt anyone but still acknowledges the truth. Lena felt a quiet strength growing. Inside her, a fragile hope that she had almost forgotten. And she knew that even if nothing changed externally, internally, she had been transformed by this moment of clarity and honesty. The rain fell steadily, the house hummed with life and quiet, and the emotional space between them, though respectful and bounded, was charged with the kind of understanding that leaves an imprint on the heart. Evan finally moved toward the doorway, pausing as if to seal the moment with one last glance that spoke of care, admiration, and the unspoken knowledge that their connection had shifted something deep inside Lena. She watched him leave, the door closing gently behind him, and she felt a mixture of emptiness and fullness, empty in the sudden absence of his presence, full in the acknowledgement of her own truth, and alive with the first spark of emotional awakening she had felt in years. Lena realized that what Evan had wanted to watch, what she had allowed him to see, was her real self, her vulnerabilities, her hidden sorrows, her quiet strength, and that this recognition was more intimate than anything she had experienced in a long time, leaving her heart racing, her mind alert, and her soul quietly transformed as the storm outside began to ease into a gentle drizzle, carrying with it the promise of clarity and understanding in the days to come. The rain had finally slowed to a gentle drizzle, leaving the streets glistening and the air crisp and clean. And Lena stood by the window, feeling the quiet of the house press against her in a way that made her suddenly aware of how alive she felt, how awake her senses were after the storm of emotions that had passed through her earlier with Evan. The porch light cast a warm glow into the living room, where she could still see the faint impression of where he had stood, and though he was gone, the intensity of his presence lingered. It's a quiet echo that made her chest tighten with longing, understanding, and a kind of aching gratitude. She knew she could not pretend the conversation hadn't changed her. Something deep inside had shifted, a fragile awareness that she had been craving without knowing it. And the realization made her heart both heavy and buoyant, a strange combination that left her feeling more alive than she had in years. Evan had been careful, respectful, and honest. Yet the emotional intimacy they had shared, the acknowledgement of her struggles, and the way he had truly seen her, it opened a door she could not close, and she knew that no matter what happened next, nothing could undo the truth that had been spoken and received between them. She replayed his words in her mind, the way he had described seeing her, noticing her quiet exhaustion, her strength, her beauty, the way she had hidden parts of herself to survive in a life that demanded more than it gave back, and she realized that she had never been recognized like that before, that she had never allowed anyone to witness her inner life without judgment or expectation. Lena felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness but from relief, from a deep emotional release that had been building for years. A recognition that her experiences mattered, that her feelings were valid, that she deserved to be seen and acknowledged in their fullness. She walked through the living room slowly, her fingers brushing along the furniture, feeling grounded yet fragile, aware of the way her heart was still racing from the intensity of the evening, from the honesty that Evan had brought into her home and into her life. She realized that the emotional clarity she felt was more powerful than any romance she could imagine, that being seen, truly seen, was a gift more precious than affection or attention alone, and that the quiet strength she had discovered in herself was something that could no longer be ignored or suppressed. Lena thought of Michael, still at work, unaware of the emotional storms that had passed in his absence, and she felt a pang of guilt, tempered by the understanding that this was not about betrayal, but about honesty, about awakening to her own needs and recognizing the gaps that had existed in her own life. The house felt unusually still, the kind of stillness that makes a person hyper-aware of their own thoughts. And Lena allowed herself to breathe deeply, feeling a sense of permission she hadn't known she needed, a freedom that came not from changing anyone else but from seeing herself through someone else's attentive and compassionate eyes. She imagined Evan walking away in the night, stepping into the quiet streets, leaving behind only the residue of his presence. And yet she could feel his influence lingering in the way her chest felt lighter, her mind clearer, her emotions raw, but steady, a mixture of longing and resolve that was entirely new. She realized that the night had given her more than conversation. It had given her perspective, the understanding that she had allowed herself to fade under the weight of responsibilities, routine, and the quiet neglect of attention, and that she now had the power to reclaim the parts of herself she had set aside. Lena's thoughts returned to Evan's final words, the gentle insistence that she deserved to be seen. And she felt a sense of quiet determination settle within her, a seed of courage that told her she could no longer hide behind appearances, that she could no longer ignore the emotional truths that had been illuminated tonight. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a cup of tea, and felt the warmth spread through her hands and into her chest, grounding her as she considered the subtle yet profound changes that had taken place. The awareness that someone had witnessed her, that someone had honored her experiences without judgment, and that this recognition had awakened something inside her that was both fragile and strong. Lena sat by the window again, watching the droplets slide down the glass, reflecting the streetlights in soft, scattered patterns, and she understood that life was shifting in small, imperceptible ways that carried immense emotional weight, that she had begun to see herself through the lens of acknowledgement, compassion, and honesty, and that this was the beginning of a transformation she had long ignored. Her thoughts drifted to the quiet power of presence. How Evan's careful attention had created a space where she could confront her own feelings without fear, where she could allow vulnerability without shame, and where she could recognize her own worth independently of anyone else's neglect or inattention. She realized that being seen did not require romance, physical intimacy, or declarations of love. It required honesty, observation, and care. And in that realization, she felt both relief and an emotional awakening that she hadn't known she needed but had always been longing for. Lena felt a soft resolve take root, a determination to honor the parts of herself that had been hidden for too long, to cultivate awareness of her own needs and desires, and to allow herself the freedom to feel, acknowledge, and embrace her own emotions without fear of judgment or guilt. She reflected on the contrast between the quiet attentiveness Evan had offered and the routine distractions that had filled her life with Michael, realizing that this was not a matter of choice between people, but a matter of choice to awaken fully to herself, to recognize the gaps in her own life, and to claim the validation and attention she deserved, even from herself first. Lena allowed herself to feel the bittersweet ache of absence, the empty space left by Evan's departure, and in that emptiness, she recognized the fullness of the gift he had given. Not a promise, not an expectation, but a witness to her truth. And in that recognition, she felt a fragile, growing power within her. A courage to live more authentically, more openly, and more emotionally aware. The quiet of the house pressed in again, the soft hum of appliances and the ticking of a clock reminding her of the ordinary world outside the transformative night. Yet she felt unshakably changed, as if the conversation, the honesty, and the emotional intimacy had created a new lens through which she could view herself and her life. Lena stood, stretching lightly, feeling a strange mixture of relief and longing. And she realized that her path forward was not defined by someone else's actions, but by her own willingness to be seen, to acknowledge her own needs, to confront her loneliness, and to embrace the emotional complexity she had long ignored. She thought of the future, uncertain but promising, understanding that she could carry the lessons of tonight into every moment, that she could nurture her emotional life with awareness and honesty, and that she could honor herself with the recognition she had finally received. As the rain slowed to a mere whisper, dripping from the eaves in soft patterns, Lena felt a quiet optimism, a fragile hope that the awakening she had experienced would grow, that she would no longer hide behind silence or routine, and that she could finally inhabit her life with the awareness, presence, and emotional depth she had long denied herself. She realized that the night with Evan was not an ending but a beginning, a chapter that marked her first steps toward seeing herself fully, acknowledging her needs, and allowing herself to exist without pretense or concealment. The house was quiet. The streets shimmered under the fading rain, and Lena felt the echo of his words, the recognition he had offered, and the validation she had been starving for, filling her heart with a tender, enduring warmth that promised growth, clarity, and the possibility of emotional fulfillment in ways she had not dared to imagine. She finally exhaled deeply, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease. And in that moment, Lena understood that being truly seen was the most intimate act she could ever experience. That she had been gifted a glimpse of what emotional honesty could bring, and that her life, though ordinary on the surface, had been transformed by the depth of attention, care, and acknowledgement Evan had shared so freely and respectfully. The door to the porch remained closed, the outside world quiet and washed clean. Yet inside, Lena felt the storm had left behind not chaos, but clarity, a profound understanding that emotional recognition, honesty, and being seen could awaken her heart, inspire her courage, and set her on a path toward a more aware, connected, and emotionally rich life. She felt the night settle around her like a gentle blanket, carrying with it the knowledge that some moments, some conversations, some witnesses to our inner lives leave marks not because they demand change, but because they illuminate truths we have been too afraid to see, and in that illumination, Lena felt herself awaken fully, quietly, and irrevocably, ready to face the days ahead with the understanding that being seen, being acknowledged, and being honest about her emotions was the most profound form of intimacy she could ever know.